The forbidden crossing. The stars of the outer rim glowed faintly, cold and distant as a small alien fleet drifted at the border of human space. The ships belonged to the Zorath, a proud race who had fought many wars across the galaxy. They believed themselves clever, strong and unstoppable, yet on this night, their arrogance carried them into a place no one dared to enter. The leader of the fleet, Captain Ral, stood tall inside his command chamber. His scaled skin shimmered under the blue light of the control panels. Around him, his officers whispered with nervous energy. The border was marked clearly on every star chart. It was a line drawn in silence, a line no empire ever crossed. Human space, one of his lieutenants muttered with a sneer. Just stories and empty threats. Captain Ral narrowed his eyes. He had heard the same tales, of humanity's strange rise, of their secret weapons, of entire fleets that vanished when they dared to test the humans. But the Zorath Empire had grown restless. They needed new territory, new resources, and above all, proof that the humans were not gods. Listen to me, Ral said firmly. We will pass through their border and nothing will happen. These humans live on old legends. They use fear as their shield. But fear cannot harm us. Laughter rippled through the chamber. Some officers joined eagerly, their voices filled with arrogance. To them, humans were backward creatures, too small and too quiet to face the great powers of the galaxy. The silence of human space was seen not as a warning, but as weakness. The fleet drifted forward, passing the invisible line. On the scanners, the stars looked the same. The black void gave no sign of danger. Only the faint light of distant suns painted the edges of the ships. Still, a heavy weight settled in the chamber, as if the darkness itself was watching them. One officer chuckled, trying to break the silence. See? Nothing, only empty space, but then the communications console flickered. A strange signal pulsed across the scanners. It was not a language they recognized, not words, but a pattern. Steady, precise and cold, the sound filled the chamber, like the heartbeat of a giant machine. What is that? Another officer whispered. His laughter vanished, replaced by unease. Ral forced a smile. Interference, nothing more. But even he felt the chill crawl along his spine. Minutes passed, the fleet pushed deeper. Far ahead, their long-range scanners detected massive shapes orbiting a barren world. At first, they thought the shapes were asteroids, drifting silently. But the shapes were too straight. Too sharp, too deliberate structures, the navigator said, voice shaking. Artificial, massive. The crew stared at the display. Giant rings circled the planet, spines of metal stretching outward like claws. Towers rose from the surface, their tips glowing faintly with strange energy. It was a world transformed into a fortress. Ral's throat tightened, but he refused to show weakness. So they build defenses, good, it means they fear us. Yet even as he spoke, the signal pulsed again, louder now, deeper. It echoed through their systems. The officers covered their ears, though there was no sound in the air. It was inside the ship, inside their minds. A warning not in words, but in raw pressure. The youngest officer trembled. Captain, maybe we should turn back. Silence, Ral barked, slamming his clawed hand against the console. We are Zorath. We do not run from ghosts, but when the forward cameras focused, the crew gasped. Behind the fortress world, drifting in the dark, shadows began to move. Dozens of massive shapes silent, waiting. Their outlines sharp and angular, each one larger than the Zorath flagship. The officer at the scanner paled. Warships. Human warships, for the first time. Silence ruled the chamber. Ral's arrogance cracked, his eyes fixed on the void where those giants floated. Unseen until now, they had not decloaked with noise or light. They had simply been there, watching, waiting. The crew shifted nervously. Some whispered prayers. Others gripped their seats as if that would protect them. Ral clenched his fists, struggling to hold control. He knew that if panic spread, the fleet would collapse before a single shot was fired. We will not be the first to strike, he said, his voice lower now. Perhaps they only watch. Perhaps they respect strength. But deep inside, he knew the truth. The humans had already chosen their response. The fortress, the signal. The silent fleet. This was no welcome. This was a warning. The Zorath had crossed the forbidden line, and the humans had noticed far beyond the fleet. One of the silent giants shifted slightly. The stars behind it blinked out as its weapons came online. A low hum vibrated across space, powerful and steady. The crew's eyes widened in terror. Captain, the young officer whispered, voice trembling. They are aiming at us. And in that frozen moment, Every Zorath heart understood the weight of their mistake. The border was never empty, the silence was never weakness. Human space was not a myth. It was a graveyard waiting for intruders. The forbidden crossing had begun, and the lesson was about to be written in fire. First contact. First shock, the Zorath fleet hung in silence, their ships frozen before the shadow of giants. The human warships did not move fast. They drifted like predators in the deep ocean, calm but terrifying. Their presence was more crushing than any weapon the Zorath had ever seen. Captain Raoul's claws tapped nervously on the command chair. His officers whispered, their voices tight with fear. Every screen glowed with warnings as human signals echoed across their systems. The strange pulse that had first touched their scanners now became sharper. It was no longer just interference. It was communication, but the language was alien. The patterns too sharp, too fast. Each pulse carried weight. It was not words but intent. The message pressed down on every mind aboard the Zorath ships. "You are not welcome here." The youngest officer trembled, his eyes wide. "Captain, they know we are here. They are warning us." Raoul forced a cold laugh. "Let them warn. We came to prove their silence is weakness." Yet even as he spoke, his voice cracked. His heart pounded inside his chest. He remembered the old stories. Fleets erased. Empires silenced after one mistake. Stories he had laughed at once. But now they clawed at the edge of his mind. Suddenly the main screen flickered. A single human warship moved forward. It did not speed toward them. It glided with calm purpose. Every sensor screamed as its weapons powered up. The size of the cannon stunned the Zorath crew. They were railguns larger than entire Zorath ships. Glowing with deadly energy, the crew panicked. Voices rising. "Captain, it's locking on us," shouted the weapons officer. "They could destroy us with one shot." Raoul stood tall, though fear burned inside him. "Hold steady. Do not fire unless I command. To attack first is to admit fear." The human ship slowed and stopped just within striking distance. For a long moment nothing moved. The void was heavy with silence. Then without sound a burst of light appeared. A projectile tore across the void at impossible speed. It missed the Zorath flagship by only a fraction, exploding into a small moon drifting nearby. The moon shattered into dust and fire. The shockwave rattled the Zorath fleet. Every officer clutched their seats in terror. The message was clear. Humans had chosen to show power, not patience. The navigator whispered, voice breaking. That was not a miss. That was a warning shot. Panic spread like fire. Some officers shouted to retreat. Others screamed to attack before it was too late. The bridge shook with chaos. Raoul roared above them. "Silence! We are not animals. We will not flee." But his words sounded empty even to himself. For in his heart he knew they were already trapped. Another human signal echoed through the chamber. This one different, softer. It carried a strange rhythm, like a heartbeat slowed by time. The crew felt it not only in their ears but deep inside their bones. One officer covered her head, whispering, "They are inside us. They are speaking to our blood." The humans had not fired again, but their presence tore apart Zorath pride. The Empire had crossed the forbidden line to prove humans weak. Yet here, at the edge of a shattered moon, the truth became undeniable. Humanity was no ghost story. They were a storm hidden in the dark. Raoul swallowed hard, his pride warred with his fear. "Open a channel," he ordered. "We will speak with them." The communications officer shook her head. "Captain, they do not use voice. Their signals are code, rhythm, pressure. It is not meant for conversation. It is meant for warning." Raoul clenched his fists. His empire would not forgive failure. Yet to fight here was death. Already the alien crew whispered the same words. "They see us, they judge us, they wait." Then, as if to end all doubt, more human ships began to drift into view. Not one or two, but dozens, each larger than the last. They surrounded the Zorath fleet with calm precision, like a net closing over prey. No sound, no haste, only certainty. The weapons officer whispered, "Captain, we cannot even count their guns. If they fire, we will be gone in moments." For the first time, Raoul's pride faltered fully. He stared at the silent human giants, their railguns glowing faintly in the dark. One shot had shattered a moon. What would a full barrage do? The chamber fell silent as the truth weighed on every Zorath soul. This was not a border. This was a cage. And they had stepped inside willingly. One by one, the officers lowered their heads. Their arrogance drained away, only fear remained. Captain Raoul's voice was hoarse when he finally spoke. Prepare to withdraw, but deep in his chest. He knew it was already too late. Humans had seen them, measured them, and allowed them to live. For now, that was no mercy, that was a lesson, and it would echo across the stars long after this night. The first contact had been made, and it was not peace that filled the void. It was shock, cold and unshakable. Humanity had spoken without words, and the Zorath would never forget. The railguns speak. The Zorath fleet drifted like insects caught in a web. Human warships surrounded them in silence. Each giant vessel carried weapons larger than cities. Glowing faintly as if waiting for a single command, Captain Raoul stood at the center of his bridge. His throat dry, pride still clung to him, but fear pressed harder around him. His officers sat frozen, their eyes fixed on the screens. Every heartbeat echoed louder in the silence. Then it happened. A soundless flash ripped across the void. A railgun fired. The projectile moved faster than thought. Faster than light itself seemed to blink. One Zorath cruiser vanished in an instant, split apart into fire and fragments. The crew screamed. The bridge shook with the shockwave. Broken metal spun through space like shards of glass. In less than a second, hundreds of lives were gone. The humans had not aimed at the flagship. They had chosen a smaller ship, a warning carved in destruction. Raoul's claws dug into the command chair, his voice cracked. Shields up! Prepare counterfire. But the truth was brutal. Shields did nothing, every scan confirmed it. The Zorath shields flickered weakly against the strange energy of the railgun strike. They were like paper walls before a storm. The weapons officer shouted, Captain, we cannot match them. Our cannons cannot even reach that range. Another flash, another strike, this time a destroyer exploded. The blast painted the void with fire. The screams of dying officers echoed over the comms before vanishing into static. Fear spread faster than fire. The crew shook. Some begged to retreat, others to surrender. Pride had no weight now, only survival. But the humans did not stop. They fired again and again. Each railgun round moved with perfect precision. Each strike erased another ship. The Zorath fleet shrank ship by ship. The silence of human weapons was more terrifying than thunder. There were no boasts, no threats, only cold efficiency. On the bridge, the youngest officer clutched his console, his voice trembling. They are not fighting us. They are teaching us. The words struck Raoul like a blade. This was not a battle, it was a demonstration. Humans were not wasting words or glory. They were carving a lesson into the stars. One by one, the Zorath ships tried to scatter. Engines flared as they turned. But the humans struck each fleeing vessel before it could escape. A railgun shot pierced one, tearing it in half. Another vanished in a silent flash of fire. No ship survived the attempt. The crew fell silent, their pride was gone, their arrogance shattered. Only fear and despair remained. Then the flagship shook. A railgun round grazed its shields. The entire vessel trembled as if the universe itself had struck it. Systems failed. Sparks erupted across the bridge. Officers fell to the ground. Raoul staggered, his vision blurred. He stared at the screens. The human warships still moved slowly, calmly. They did not rush. They did not need to. They owned the void. Send a signal, Raoul whispered hoarsely. Tell them, we surrender. The communications officer looked up with pale eyes. Captain, they do not respond to words. Raoul's voice broke. Then what do they respond to? No one answered because everyone already knew. Humans did not need to answer. Their railguns spoke louder than any words. Their silence was the language of power. Another Zorath cruiser exploded. The flames reflected in every officer's eyes. The bridge smelled of smoke and fear. The hum of failing systems grew louder. The crew began to whisper prayers. Some begged their gods. Others whispered for forgiveness. The youngest officer shook his head. They could destroy us all, but they choose not to. They want us to carry this memory. They want the galaxy to remember. Raoul's claws trembled. He felt the weight of truth pressing on him. This was not conquest, it was judgment. The humans allowed some to live so the story would spread, so the galaxy would fear, and fear was stronger than war. The flagship trembled again, but the next shot never came. The railguns fell silent. The human ships drifted, their glowing weapons cooling. Their message was clear. You live because we allow it. The surviving Zorath ships floated broken, damaged, but alive. Only a handful remained from the proud fleet. The void was filled with wreckage and fire, yet the silence was louder than any battle cry. Raoul sank into his chair. His pride was ashes. His voice nothing but a whisper. We came to mock them, and now we are their story. And he was right. Across the stars this night would echo. Empires would whisper. Fleets would hesitate. And every ruler would think twice before crossing the silent border of human space. The railguns had spoken, and the galaxy would never forget. The silence that followed, the battlefield was no longer alive with fire. The railguns had stopped and the void returned to its quiet state. Broken Zorath ships drifted slowly, their hulls torn and burning. Small pieces of wreckage spun like sparks across the black sea of stars. But the human warships did not move. They floated calmly, weapons still glowing faintly, as if waiting for another reason to speak. Captain Raoul sat slumped in his command chair. His once proud figure was bent and heavy. Around him, officers whispered in weak voices. Some cried quietly. Others stared blankly at the broken screens. The bridge smelled of burnt wires and fear. They are not finishing us, the navigator said, his voice dry. Why not? Why let us live? Raoul's eyes flickered toward the massive human ship that hovered nearby. Its weapons were still aimed. Its presence pressed on them like a mountain. He shook his head slowly. Because this is worse. To live with the memory is worse than death. The silence grew heavier. It was not empty silence, it was the silence of judgment. The silence of an enemy so certain of its power that it needed no words. The Zorath officers shifted nervously. Every second under human gaze felt like an eternity. Then, the strange signal pulsed again through their systems, that same rhythm, sharp and steady. The officers froze, hearts racing. It was not language. But every soul on board understood its meaning. It said, "You have seen enough, go tell them." The youngest officer whispered, "They want us to spread the story. They want the galaxy to fear them." The words settled on them like cold iron. And it was true, no one could deny it. Humanity had not fought a war here. Humanity had carved a warning. Raoul forced his trembling claws to grip the console. "Prepare the engines," he ordered, though his voice was weak. "We leave now." The crew obeyed. But fear remained in their eyes. The surviving ships limped together, forming a small cluster. Engines sparked, hulls cracked. Yet the fleet began to turn back toward the border. Not a single human ship moved to stop them. Not a single railgun fired. The humans simply watched in silence as the Zorath crawled away. Each moment felt like walking through a storm without being touched. Every officer prayed the humans would not change their minds. As they crossed back into neutral space, the tension did not fade. The silence followed them. It clung to their ships like shadow. It pressed into their hearts like a second heartbeat. None dared to speak loudly, none dared to laugh. Their arrogance had died in human space. For days the survivors drifted home. Every star along the way reminded them of the fire they had seen. Every silent moment reminded them of the giants in the void. By the time they reached Zorath territory, their pride was gone. Their voices were soft, their eyes haunted. When they returned to the Empire, leaders demanded answers. They expected victory songs. They expected proof that humans were weak. Instead, they received silence. The survivors bowed their heads, trembling. Their stories spilled out in broken whispers. "We saw them," one officer said. "Warships larger than mountains. Weapons that tear moons apart. They let us live," another added. "Not because they were merciful, but because they wanted us to speak." At first, the Empire laughed. They mocked the survivors as cowards. But when they saw the fear in their eyes, the trembling in their hands, the way they flinched at shadows, the laughter died. No warrior carried such terror without reason. Whispers spread quickly through the Empire. Across markets, across courts, across barracks, one truth echoed. The humans are real and they are watching. No Zorath dared to cross the border again. The Emperor himself ordered maps redrawn, human space marked in red, circled by silence. But the silence did not stay in Zorath space alone. Traders carried the story further. Spies whispered it in other empires. Soon the tale reached every corner of the galaxy. Some laughed, some doubted. But in the end, all felt unease across the stars. Rulers began to pause when they looked toward human space. Generals hesitated, merchants turned their roots away. And in the minds of children, bedtime stories shifted into warnings. Never go where the humans sleep. Never cross their border or the silence will find you. On his flagship, Captain Raoul sat alone, staring at the stars. His scales no longer shimmered with pride. They looked dull, worn by fear, he whispered to himself. The silence is worse than death, for silence does not end, and he was right. The silence that followed that battle was more powerful than the railguns themselves. It spread faster than fire, stronger than any empire. It became legend. The galaxy learned a lesson that day, not through conquest, not through treaties, but through the heavy silence of humanity, and that silence echoed across the stars. The lesson, across the stars, years passed, but the memory of that night never faded. The wreckage of Zorath's ships still drifted quietly on the edge of human space. Like tombstones in the dark, no one dared to recover them. No one dared to cross that border again. In Zorath cities, people spoke in hushed voices. The empire that once laughed at humans now trembled whenever their name was whispered. Children were taught warnings instead of war songs. Do not go where the humans live, do not test the silence. Captain Raoul lived with the weight of his choice. His name once carried pride, now it carried shame. He rarely spoke in council. His eyes haunted. His claws trembled whenever he remembered the railguns. He knew the Empire blamed him, but deeper than blame was fear. No one wanted to anger the beings who had let them live. But it was not only the Zorath who carried the lesson. Other empires listened. Spies carried the story across the stars. Traders whispered it in crowded ports. Soon every race knew of the silence of human space. Some dismissed it as myth, yet their voices cracked when they argued. Others pretended not to believe, but quietly rerouted their fleets to avoid the forbidden border. Even the strongest warlords paused before sending scouts into that shadow. For humanity had spoken without speaking. They had shown power greater than conquest. Their silence became the sharpest blade in the galaxy. In the courts of distant empires, debates erupted. Could the humans be bargained with? Could they be tricked? Yet no one dared to try. Too many remembered the shattered moon, the railguns that erased ships in a blink, the calm silence that followed. And so the galaxy lived in caution. Each empire busy with its own wars, but none foolish enough to cross into human territory. The memory of that one fleet's destruction was enough to hold back entire civilizations.
On a quiet world far from the border, a teacher spoke to her class of alien children.
She told them the tale as it had been told to her. Long ago, a proud fleet entered human space. They thought they were mighty. They thought humans were weak. But they returned broken. Their pride turned to dust. Their story became a warning to us all. One child raised her hand, her eyes wide. "Teacher, why didn't the humans destroy them all?" The teacher fell silent for a long moment. She looked at the stars outside the window. "Because death ends a story, but fear makes it eternal." The humans wanted their silence to echo, and it still does. The children shivered. Some looked at the stars with wonder, others with dread. The lesson was not about ships or weapons. It was about patience, control, and the power of silence. Meanwhile, within human space, there was no celebration. No parades, no declarations. Humanity did not boast. They did not shout their victory. They simply remained silent, building, watching, waiting. Their warships drifted in the dark, cloaked in quiet, as if time itself moved slower around them. And this silence became a greater weapon than any railgun. For the galaxy began to imagine what else the humans could do. If one fleet had been destroyed so easily, what could happen to an empire? If a moon was shattered in a single shot, what could happen to a world? The unknown became their terror. Captain Raoul lived long enough to see the effect. He watched other empires turn their ships away from human space. He saw mighty rulers bow to a border they never dared to test. And he realized the truth. Humanity had not just won a battle, they had reshaped the galaxy with silence. Near the end of his life, he whispered to his kin, "Remember this. The humans did not destroy us, but they destroyed who we were. They gave us a gift far worse than death, memory. And that memory will outlive all empires," and he was right. Generations later, long after the Zorath captain was gone, the story was still told. In marketplaces, in palaces, in battlefields, alien voices repeated the same words. They ventured into human space once, and the lesson still echoes across the stars. The silence of that night never faded. It became legend, it became law, and it shaped the galaxy forever. For humanity had taught them all a truth carved in steel and fire. To mock the silence of humans was to invite the wrath of gods.